Is this some kind of joke? The voice, sharp and laced with the unearned confidence of youth, sliced through the Nevada desert air like a blade. Lance Corporal Martinez, barely 20 years old but wearing his Marine Corps uniform like a badge of superiority, gestured dismissively toward the rifle resting on the weathered shooting bench. "Sir, you can't be serious about bringing that thing here." Roberto Bobby Vega, 79 years old with silver hair and hands that told stories of decades spent building impossible things, didn't turn his head. His gaze remained fixed downrange, where heat shimmers rose from the baked earth, distorting the distant targets into dancing mirages. He sat on a simple folding chair, his posture relaxed but grounded like an old oak tree. The rifle in question was indeed a startling sight. Its custom-built stock and chassis were coated in bright safety orange, the color of construction equipment or hunting vests. It looked utterly out of place among the tactical blacks, desert tans, and olive drabs of the serious military-grade hardware that populated the extreme long-range facility. Another young Marine, Private Johnson with eager eyes and a fresh haircut, snickered. "Maybe he thinks it's a paintball gun, Corporal, for when the real shooting gets too scary." The small group of them, all pressed uniforms and high-speed gear, shared a laugh. They were the new breed, masters of digital scopes and smartphone ballistic apps. To them, this old civilian and his garish rifle were relics from a forgotten age, an amusing sideshow before their serious training began. Martinez stepped closer, his shadow falling across Bobby's bench. "I'm going to have to ask you to pack up your equipment, sir. This is a restricted range for active duty personnel conducting advanced precision rifle training." He pointed again at the orange rifle with theatrical disgust. "That is a distraction and frankly a safety concern. We're working with sensitive equipment here." His tone carried the carefully rehearsed authority of a young man who'd been given just enough power to be dangerous with it. Bobby Vega remained silent, his weathered hands resting calmly on his knees. His stillness seemed to unnerve the corporal more than any argument could have. It was the kind of profound quiet that spoke of depths these young Marines couldn't fathom. The range, a sprawling expanse of engineered precision carved from the high desert, was normally a place of controlled chaos and technical discussion. But in this small bubble of confrontation an uncomfortable tension had settled like dust. Other shooters at nearby benches had paused their activities, conversations trailing off as they watched the one-sided exchange. The desert air seemed to hold its breath. "Wait." Lance Corporal Martinez, feeling the weight of attention and misinterpreting the old man's silence as either confusion or defiance, pressed his advantage. His voice rose, a clear breach of range etiquette. "Did you hear me, old man? I said pack it up. What are you even doing here? This isn't some weekend gun club." Martinez leaned in, lowering his voice to what he imagined was an intimidating whisper, but was still loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You probably don't even have proper clearance to be on this facility. This is a military installation, not a public shooting range." Bobby finally moved. The motion was slow, deliberate, as he reached for a simple canvas bag beside his chair. The Marines tensed, expecting him to finally comply with their demand. Instead, he drew out a worn leather wallet, the kind that's softened by decades of patient use, and opened it to reveal a laminated card. He held it out without a word. Martinez snatched the base access permit, expecting to find an obvious forgery or expired credential. He glanced at it, then did a double take, turning it over and over as if the plastic might reveal some hidden deception. The name read Vega, Roberto, and the credentials, to his visible frustration, were not only legitimate, but carried clearance levels that made his own access card look like a library card. "This has to be a mistake," Martinez muttered, shoving the card back at the old man. His inability to find grounds for ejection only fueled his irritation. "Fine, you have access. But that doesn't mean you can play with your toys while we're conducting serious military training." He gestured downrange toward a target so distant it was barely visible to the naked eye. "We have a 4,500-meter target array set up for advanced qualification, multi-million-dollar sensor equipment, not a backstop for your personal hobby project." The desert range stretched out before them like a moonscape, with targets positioned at distances that pushed the absolute limits of rifle technology. Heat shimmer created an almost liquid atmosphere that made precision shooting at these ranges as much art as science. "We're pushing the boundaries of what's possible here," Martinez continued, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. "The last thing we need is interference from amateur equipment messing up our data collection." Private Johnson, emboldened by his corporal's aggression, reached out and tapped the orange rifle stock with his finger. "Feels like cheap polymer. Did you 3D print this in your garage, Pops? The moment the young Marine's finger touched the rifle, Bobby Vega's eyes changed. For just a fraction of a second, the calm, patient gaze of the elderly man was replaced by something ancient and hard, like looking into the depths of a canyon where sunlight had never reached. The Nevada sun glinting off the rifle's scope vanished, replaced by the dim, filtered light of a jungle canopy. He could smell cordite and monsoon rain, feel the phantom weight of a wounded pilot's arm across his shoulder. A voice from another time, strained with pain, echoed in his memory. They're zeroing in on us, Bobby. You have to take the shot. It's our only chance. The orange wasn't a joke or poor taste. It was so the rescue helicopters could spot him in the green hell of the jungle canopy, a beacon of hope in an ocean of hostile vegetation. He blinked, and the memory receded, leaving the bright desert and the smirking faces of the young Marine. Across the range, standing near the observation tower, Master Sergeant Elena Ramirez watched the confrontation unfold with growing concern. She was a retired Marine now, working as the facility's civilian operations coordinator, and she'd seen her share of arrogant young NCOs throwing their weight around. But something about this situation was different. It wasn't just the disrespect, it was who was receiving it. The old man wasn't a typical civilian shooter. There was an economy of movement in how he sat, a profound stillness that spoke of immense discipline and training. And the rifle, as unusual as it looked, had the clean, purposeful lines of a precision instrument, built by someone who understood ballistics at a level these kids couldn't comprehend. Elena's eyes narrowed as she recalled signing the old man in earlier that morning. The name had triggered a distant memory. Something from advanced training courses, whispered stories about specialists who worked in the shadows of military history. Vega, Roberto J. The name connected with half-remembered legends, classified briefings about projects that officially didn't exist. Her blood ran cold as the pieces fell into place. These Marines had no idea what they were dealing with. They weren't just harassing a civilian. They were confronting a ghost from the Black Ops world. Elena turned away from the scene, pulling her secure phone from her pocket. She walked behind the range tower, her back to the unfolding drama, and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for the base command center. This was a massive overreach of her authority as civilian staff, a call that could cost her, but she also knew with bone-deep certainty that it was a call she had to make. Command Center, Captain Rodriguez speaking. Captain, this is Master Sergeant Ramirez at the Extreme Range Facility. I have a situation developing that requires immediate command attention. What kind of situation, Master Sergeant? The voice was professional but slightly annoyed. We have Marines from 2nd Recon harassing a civilian contractor. They're about to cross a very serious line. Sounds like a discipline issue that should go through their chain of command. Sir, Elena interrupted, her voice taking on an edge of urgency. The civilian is Roberto Vega. Silence. Complete, absolute silence that stretched for nearly 10 seconds. Did you say Roberto Vega? The captain's voice had changed completely, stripped of its casual authority. Yes, sir, and they're mocking his equipment, calling it toys. Sir, these Marines have no idea who they're dealing with. Jesus Christ, came the whispered response. Keep them separated. Do not let this escalate. I'm alerting the base commander immediately. The line went dead, leaving Elena with the distinct feeling that she had just set in motion events that would reshape several young Marines' understanding of their place in the world. In the base command center, Captain Rodriguez stared at his phone with growing dread, then reached for the red phone that connected directly to the commanding general's office. Inside the climate-controlled command center, Captain Rodriguez's hands trembled slightly as he input Roberto Vega's name into the classified personnel database. The system processed for a moment, then returned results that made his blood freeze. Access restricted. Project classification. U-Umbrella Ghost. Clearance required. Flag officer only. Rodriguez had been in the Marines for 8 years and had never seen a classification that high. He immediately picked up the secure line to General Patricia Valdez's office. General, this is Captain Rodriguez at the command center. Ma'am, we have a Code Black situation developing at the Extreme Range Facility. What kind of Code Black, Captain? General Valdez's voice was sharp, focused. Ma'am, we have Marines from 2nd Recon in a confrontation with a civilian. The civilian is Roberto Vega. The silence on the other end was so complete that Rodriguez thought the line had gone dead. When General Valdez spoke again, her voice carried a weight that made the captain's spine straighten involuntarily. Captain, are you telling me that Roberto Vega is on my base right now? Yes, ma'am, and according to Master Sergeant Ramirez, Marines are harassing him, calling his equipment toys. Mother of God, the general breathed. Captain, I want a full security escort to that range immediately. 3-vehicle convoy. Dress blues. Full honors. And Captain, yes ma'am, if those Marines have laid one finger on that man, their careers are over. Vega isn't just any veteran, he's the reason half our current technology exists. Get me Colonel Santos on the line. Now, 5 minutes later, General Valdez was striding toward her staff car, followed by her aide and security detail. Colonel Santos, the base's senior operations officer, jogged to keep up. Ma'am, I've reviewed his file, what I can access anyway. Roberto Vega, civilian contractor for DARPA for 35 years. But there's something else. Classified designations I've never seen before. Colonel, the general said as they reached the vehicles. Roberto Vega didn't just work for DARPA. For 3 decades, he was DARPA's most classified asset. The weapons systems these Marines are carrying, the ballistic computers they rely on, the precision optics they take for granted. Vega either designed them or significantly improved them. She paused at her vehicle door. And that orange rifle they're mocking? That's a prototype that's 20 years ahead of anything in our current inventory. It's worth more than the entire annual budget of their unit. Back at the range, Lance Corporal Martinez had reached his breaking point. The old man's silent refusal to acknowledge his authority had become a personal insult. The growing crowd made him feel his credibility as a Marine NCO was being challenged by an octogenarian with a ridiculous orange gun. All right, that's it, Martinez snapped, his voice cracking with frustration. You're being a danger to this facility and my Marines. I'm ordering you to vacate this position immediately, or I'll have you detained for obstruction. He took a menacing step forward, reaching for Bobby's shoulder, intending to physically remove him from the bench. He never made contact. The sound started as a low rumble. A vibration felt through the soles of boots before it was heard. It grew rapidly into the thunderous roar of high-performance engines pushed to their limits, accompanied by the distinctive whine of turbochargers and the crunch of gravel under racing tires. Every head on the range turned toward the main access road. A massive dust cloud was billowing into the desert sky, chasing a convoy of black government SUVs that were closing the distance at terrifying speed. They weren't simply driving fast, they were moving with the urgency reserved for national emergencies. The convoy bypassed the parking area entirely, driving directly onto the range itself and forming a perfect tactical formation around the confrontation. Dust hung in the air as doors flew open with military precision. From the lead vehicle stepped Colonel Santos, his uniform immaculate despite the urgent response. But it was the figure who emerged from the second SUV that caused every jaw on the range to drop. Brigadier General Patricia Valdez stepped onto the desert floor, her single star gleaming in the Nevada sun. She was a living legend, a woman who had shattered barriers and earned respect through 3 decades of exemplary service. With a combat record that was the stuff of Marine Corps folklore, her eyes, intelligent and hard as flint, swept the scene with tactical precision. She took in Martinez's aggressive posture, the stunned faces of his Marines, and finally settled on the calm, seated figure of Bobby Vega. She ignored everyone else completely. General Valdez's stride was purposeful and direct as she walked straight toward the elderly man. The entire range had fallen utterly silent except for the crunch of her boots on gravel and the ticking of cooling engines. Lance Corporal Martinez stood frozen, his hand still extended toward Bobby's shoulder, his mind unable to process what was happening. A brigadier general had just arrived at a routine training exercise with the kind of escort normally reserved for visiting heads of state. General Valdez stopped directly in front of Bobby Vega. Without a word, she brought her heels together with a sharp crack, her spine ramrod straight, and executed the crispest, most respectful salute Martinez had ever witnessed. It wasn't the perfunctory salute given to a superior officer. It was a salute of profound, almost reverent respect, the kind a warrior gives to a living legend. Mr. Vega, she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the silent range. It is an honor, sir. I apologize profusely for the conduct of my Marines. They are clearly ignorant of who they are addressing. She held the salute, waiting. Bobby Vega slowly, gracefully rose from his chair. He wasn't as tall as he once was, but he stood with a dignity that seemed to add inches to his frame. He gave a slight acknowledging nod. Only then did General Valdez drop her salute. She turned to face Martinez, and the warmth in her expression was replaced by Arctic ice. Lance Corporal, General Valdez began, her voice dangerously quiet but carrying to every corner of the range. Do you have any idea who this man is? Martinez, pale and trembling, could only stammer. No, ma'am. He's a civilian, ma'am. A civilian. The general's laugh was short and humorless. Lance Corporal, you and your Marines are standing in the presence of a man who has served his country in ways you couldn't imagine in your worst nightmares. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembled crowd like a physical presence. This is Roberto Vega. For 35 years he was DARPA's most classified contractor. The rifle systems you carry, the ballistic computers you depend on, the precision optics you take for granted. Mr. Vega either designed them or revolutionized. Colonel Santos stepped forward with a tablet, his expression grim. Lance Corporal, perhaps you'd like to know about the man whose equipment you called toys. He began reading from the classified file. Roberto Vega holds 17 patents in advanced ballistics, 12 in optical systems, and 23 in materials engineering. His innovations have been integrated into every precision weapon system the United States military has fielded in the past 3 decades. The silence on the range was now absolute, thick with shame and awe. Martinez looked as if he wanted the desert to swallow him whole. General Valdez gestured toward the orange rifle. And this toy you were so quick to mock. This is the Mk7 prototype, the ancestor of every advanced rifle system in our inventory. Mr. Vega built the first one in a forward operating base with salvaged aluminum and hand-machined components. She took a step closer to Martinez, her voice dropping to a menacing growl. The bright orange coating you find so amusing, that was battlefield necessity. Mr. Vega spent 72 hours in enemy territory, providing overwatch for a downed pilot. The orange paint was so rescue helicopters could locate his position for extraction. The general's voice rose again, ensuring every Marine present could hear. That color saved his life and the life of the pilot he protected, a pilot who went on to become a 4-star general and is now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She pointed directly at Martinez. You saw an old man with a colorful rifle. What you were actually looking at was a living piece of American military history, a man whose innovations have saved thousands of lives, and whose expertise is quite literally irreplaceable. Bobby Vega finally spoke, his voice not loud but carrying a quiet authority that commanded even more attention than the general's anger. General, he said calmly, they're young Marines doing their job. Pride is a good thing. They just need to learn how to aim it properly. He looked directly at Martinez, with eyes that held no anger, only profound wisdom. Respect isn't about age, son. It's about recognizing excellence wherever you find it, even when it doesn't look like what you expected. General Valdez turned back to Bobby, her expression softening into something approaching reverence. Mr. Vega, would you honor us by demonstrating what that rifle can actually do? Bobby nodded slowly and moved to his shooting position. The crowd of Marines, including a thoroughly humbled Martinez, formed a respectful semicircle behind the firing line. The range had been cleared except for Bobby, giving him a stage he'd never asked for but clearly deserved. The 4,500-meter target, Bobby said quietly, settling behind the orange rifle. Your computers tell you it's impossible in these conditions. He made a few simple adjustments to his scope, confident movements based on a lifetime of understanding physics that no computer could replicate quickly enough. His breathing slowed to the rhythm of someone who'd learned to find absolute calm in absolute chaos. Wind speed at 1,000 meters is different from wind speed at 3,000 meters, he continued, his voice taking on an instructional tone. Temperature gradients create invisible rivers in the air. Your ballistic computer can calculate averages, but the bullet has to fly through specifics. He paused, reading signs in the desert air that were invisible to everyone else. The mirage tells you about thermal layers. The way dust moves tells you about ground-level currents. Nature gives you all the data you need. You just have to learn her language. As Bobby settled into his final shooting position, another memory surfaced with crystal clarity. He was 45 years old, lying in a hastily constructed hide while enemy forces closed in. The pilot behind him was badly wounded, and the extraction helicopter was still hours away. He could hear voices getting closer, boots on jungle floor, the metallic click of weapons being readied. Through his scope, he could see the enemy patrol leader, a shot that would either save them both or get them both killed. Orange stands out, he had whispered to the delirious pilot. When the bird comes, they'll see us. What if you miss? The pilot had gasped. Bobby had smiled grimly. Then the orange won't matter anyway. Back on the Nevada range, Bobby Vega squeezed the trigger. The crack of the custom rifle was sharp and authoritative, echoing off the distant mountains. For several long seconds, the only sound was the whisper of desert wind across the range. Then from 4,500 meters away, came the unmistakable ring of copper-jacketed lead striking hardened steel. The electronic target system flashed green, a perfect center hit. A wave of spontaneous applause erupted from the assembled Marines, a release of morning tension and genuine respect for what they'd just witnessed. It wasn't just an exceptional shot, it was a demonstration of expertise that redefined what they thought was possible. General Valdez shook her head in admiration, then turned her cold gaze back to Martinez. "Lance Corporal, you have just witnessed something that will probably never happen again in your lifetime. I suggest you remember it." The fallout was swift and comprehensive. General Valdez was true to her word about consequences, but they came in the form of education rather than punishment. Lance Corporal Martinez and his squad were assigned to a month-long special detail that would transform their understanding of military heritage. They didn't just study history, they were immersed in it, spending their days in the base archives and their evenings writing detailed reports on the evolution of military technology. They learned about the men and women who had developed the tools they took for granted, the classified projects that had pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and the often anonymous innovators who had saved countless lives through their expertise. Martinez found himself particularly drawn to studying the development of precision shooting systems. He discovered that virtually every advancement in the field over the past 30 years could be traced back to innovations pioneered by Roberto Vega and his small team of military contractors. The orange rifle that he had mocked wasn't just a prototype, it was the ancestor of the weapons system he carried every day. 2 weeks into his educational assignment, Martinez encountered Bobby at the base commissary. The old man was selecting produce with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. Martinez's heart hammered as he approached. "Mr. Vega," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, I wanted to apologize properly. There's no excuse for my behavior. I was arrogant, and I was completely wrong." Bobby looked at the young Marine and saw genuine remorse in his eyes. He saw a boy who had been humbled and a man who was beginning to emerge from that humbling. "I told you, son," Bobby said kindly. "Pride is a good thing when it's aimed in the right direction. You're learning to aim it better." He selected a tomato and examined it carefully. "The same principles apply to everything: respect for your tools, understanding of your environment, and patience to see what others miss." Martinez nodded, then asked hesitantly, "Sir, would you be willing to teach us, not just about shooting, but about seeing things differently?" Bobby smiled. "Son, I've been teaching for 40 years. The trick isn't having the right equipment, it's having the right perspective." Over the following weeks, an unofficial mentorship developed. Bobby began visiting the range regularly, not as a shooter but as an instructor. His lessons went far beyond marksmanship, encompassing observation, problem-solving, and the kind of creative thinking that had made him invaluable to DARPA for 3 decades. The young Marines learned that innovation often came from constraints, that the best solutions were usually the simplest ones, and that respect for those who came before was the foundation for building something better. Martinez proved to be Bobby's most dedicated student, arriving early and staying late, eager to absorb everything the old innovator could teach. 6 months after the incident that changed everything, the Marine Corps formally established the Vega Innovation Program, a curriculum that combined advanced technical training with historical education and mentorship from retired specialists. Bobby found himself busier in his late 70s than he'd been in years, traveling between military installations to share not just his technical knowledge but his philosophy of problem-solving and innovation. "The best engineers," he would tell groups of young Marines, "aren't the ones who know the most about existing technology. They're the ones who can see what doesn't exist yet and figure out how to build it." His presentations went far beyond technical specification. He taught them to think like innovators, to see problems as opportunities, to understand that the most revolutionary advances often came from combining existing technologies in new ways. "That orange rifle didn't start as a design," he explained during one session. "It started as a problem. How do you build a precision weapon in the field with limited resources? And how do you make sure your teammates can find you when everything goes wrong?" The program became so successful that other branches of the military requested similar curricula. Bobby's approach, combining rigorous technical education with creative problem-solving and historical perspective, was producing a new generation of military innovators. Martinez, now promoted to sergeant, had become Bobby's unofficial teaching assistant. The transformation in the young Marine was remarkable. from cocky technician to thoughtful leader who understood that the best innovations came from understanding both the technology and the people who would use it. What I learned, Martinez explained to a group of new students, is that Vega didn't just design weapons, he designed solutions. Every piece of equipment he created started with a simple question: how do we bring our people home safe? The orange rifle had been donated to the Marine Corps Museum, where it was displayed with a placard explaining its revolutionary design and the battlefield conditions that had inspired its creation. But more important than the hardware was the thinking behind it, the approach to innovation that was now being passed on to new generations. General Valdez, who had become one of Bobby's strongest advocates, often spoke about the program at military conferences. We realized we were training our people to use technology without understanding how to create it, she would explain. Mr. Vega reminded us that our greatest strength isn't our equipment, it's our ability to innovate when existing solutions aren't enough. The program's success was measured not just in technical achievements but in the changed perspective of its participants. Young Marines who had once seen innovation as something that happened in distant laboratories began to understand that they were all potential innovators, that the next breakthrough might come from someone who was willing to look at old problems in new ways. Bobby's greatest satisfaction came from seeing former students go on to develop their own innovations, carrying forward the cycle of creative problem-solving that had defined his career. 2 years after the confrontation that had revealed his identity, Bobby Vega sat in his workshop behind his modest house in the Nevada foothills, surrounded by the tools and equipment that had been his companions for decades. At 81, he had officially stepped back from active consultation, but his mind remained as sharp as ever. The workshop was a reflection of its owner, organized, purposeful, filled with prototypes and half-finished projects that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The walls were lined with photographs, young Marines using equipment he had designed, thank you letters from soldiers whose lives had been saved by his innovations, and images from ceremonies he had rarely attended but that honored his contribution. A knock at the door interrupted his work on a new optical system design. Martinez, now Gunnery Sergeant Martinez and an instructor at the innovation program, stood outside with a small group of young Marines. Mr. Vega, Martinez said respectfully, I hope you don't mind the visit. These Marines are working on a project I thought you might find interesting. Bobby welcomed them into his workshop, where the young Marines, carefully selected for their creativity and technical aptitude, presented their challenge, designing a communication system that could function in environments where traditional electronics fail. We've been thinking about your approach, one of them explained, starting with the problem instead of the technology. How do you communicate when you can't rely on satellites or radio frequencies? Bobby smiled, recognizing the kind of thinking that had driven his own career. Show me what you've tried so far. For the next 2 hours, the workshop became a classroom where experience met enthusiasm. Bobby didn't give them answers. Instead, he asked questions that guided them toward their own solutions, helped them see possibilities they had overlooked, encouraged them to think beyond conventional approach. The best innovations, he told them as they prepared to leave, come from understanding that every limitation is also an opportunity. When you can't do something the obvious way, you have to find a better way. After they left, Bobby returned to his workbench and the optical project he'd been developing. It was a personal challenge now rather than a military contract, a system that could provide unprecedented clarity at extreme distances while remaining compact enough for field use. The orange rifle was gone, displayed in the museum where future generations could learn from its example. But the thinking behind it lived on in every young innovator who learned to see problems as invitations to create something better. As evening settled over the Nevada mountains, Bobby reflected on the unexpected turn his retirement had taken. He had spent 40 years building solutions for problems others couldn't solve, but perhaps his greatest innovation had been inspiring others to think like innovators themselves. Sometimes, he thought as he fine-tuned the optical alignment, the most important thing you can build isn't a device or a weapon. It's a way of thinking that outlasts any particular technology and creates possibilities that don't exist yet. The workshop lights stayed on late into the night, illuminating work that would continue long after its creator was gone.